in the universe. They're us. It's us. So we don't want to injure ourselves. People of different races and religions and plants and animals and stones and meteors. It's us. It's us. And part of that's actually experience, not made up or not just a response to, but an actual experience of compassion, of love. That connectedness is love. That's what all the traditions testify is the actual experience when you delve into their inmost meaning. So if that is cultivated, and if we have that sense that I'm the keeper of everything in the universe in the universe is me, I'm it, my ego's gone, it's all part of a higher reality. Call it the Buddha nature or the resurrected Christ, or whatever you want to call it, Brahman. That will save us, because it will make us so careful about what we do to anyone or anything ever, because we're harming ourselves and we're harming, we're going against the compassion and the love, which is the driving force of the universe, as everyone from Dante to the modern mystics says.
Thank you so much for that. I was just going to mention the book Technicalosis. I forget the author's name, but it's sort of in technology circles and beyond. It's considered quite an interesting and important work, where the author argues that technology does allow for a type of mystical experience, and that increasingly we have to see, in keeping with the notion that we are becoming cyborgs, in some cases already are cyborgs.
It can help, yeah.
And maybe what we have to do actively is to think how technology can be incorporated into our, consciously incorporated into our, not just physical well-being, but in our spiritual well-being.
Yeah, that's a fascinating idea, yeah.
I want to follow up on your question about the place of religion. You used the word wisdom. And I just want to add to what you just said, though. It's really important, I think, if you spend a lot of time with the literature of ecology and some of the earth system science stuff too, but there's a lot of what I think qualifies as wisdom in this sort of what Stuart Kaufman calls it, in the unrepentant holism.
Yeah.
The unrepentant holism that is a part of the best of ecological science, and a part of the best of earth system science. And so I wouldn't want to reserve the word wisdom
to religion,
only for religion and spiritual traditions.
No.
I think there's a lot of ecological wisdom. But it has to do with the kinds of interconnectedness you were just talking about. And you have to, there's a certain pedigree, a certain lineage. You go back and you look at people, Alexander von Humboldt. I mean, you can go much further back than that, to the pre-Socratics. But there's a lineage that has been consistently squelched in the history of Western thought, which has taken the world by storm through science and technology.
And
but
violence.
And violence, which is the tool.
Not just Western.
So. So that lineage is getting, and then it got sort of dumped on by, they're always, if you think in this way, everything's all connected. The butterfly effect is real. Systems are complex and adaptive. You start to be accused of being a romantic. But in fact, it's well-documented empirical science at this point. This is the way the Earth system works. This is the way its subsystem works. Subsystems are systems of nested systems of which we are a part. And this is, so it has a sort of, it's the kind of thing that seers and sages and mystics may have been saying in their own way for many, many centuries. And it's not to say that it has now the imprimatur of science, but it's another thread in that conversation. And I don't want to, it's not just about confirmation, because a lot of the people who are doing it aren't trying to confirm something they heard before. It's a true discovery. For Humboldt, who's walking around in the late 18th, early 19th century, traveling all over the world, and reaching all these conclusions, giving sort of anticipatory comments about human-induced climate change and all that stuff. It's because he saw how everything is interconnected, and he was anything but a spiritual man, but there was real wisdom in his. I've been spending a lot of time reading about him lately, so he's on the tip of my tongue.
The Invention of Nature, I think that's about
Andrea Wolf's book.
To what extent are these discussions, whether a sort of Buddhist understanding of our interconnection, our fundamental interconnection to everything and everyone, or a sort of more ecological, to what extent are these discussions making it to technologists? Is it even within their purview if someone has to create some code which fulfills a particular function which is very limited in its scope? Does it even matter that we have these conversations? How?
I mean, that's tough to answer. I think my first reaction would be no, probably not. But that's maybe cynical, and maybe for the larger corporations and the larger institutions driving these things, maybe that this is not being taken into account. But I think the good thing about technology now as it is, and AI kind of broadly speaking, is that it can be easily democratized, and it's rather easy for people to, that's how we have all these startups in Silicon Valley, because it can just be some couple people in their garage, and they're able to make an app that you can download all over the world. So when you were speaking about kind of that AI could have some kind of positive effect on having us appreciate the more mystical understanding of the world, and that we are interconnected. I was curious, I wanted to hear more about what that could be. I at first thought of Facebook or Twitter or something, and thinking that like if you just described what you said about where it's about connection, it's about love, it's about interconnectedness, and I think, well, people that I love are on Facebook, and I can kind of interconnect with them more, and I can see them more. And so you'd think that in a way, if you just described this problem and then you said, now we have this new technology, it sounds like kind of a solution. But research has already shown that people who use social networks more are less happy, and it seems to make them less happy, and it seems to make them less connected. Right. And so there's this kind of perverse effect where even if you wanted to take into account these concerns and you wanted to build a system that would enact them, you might not end up doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's why you need religion and philosophy, because otherwise it won't have that effect. It's not enough just to be on Facebook and to connect with 3,000 friends in order for you to become wise and compassionate. No, it's not happening, because you need this other approach.
And can you talk more about like what might go into that? Or
well, as I was saying, if we do take, you can take the philosophical, ecological approach too, as Matthew was saying, but if you do take the wisdom approach of the religions, then you'd have to practice them. Don't just do mindfulness to quiet you down on a Saturday night, but actually plunge into who am I, and what is the world, and what is beyond, what are my connections, and then you simply have to practice some kind of religious meditative tradition.
As it so happens, Chad, you practice in Buddhism, right?
Yes, I've just begun to practice.
Yeah, I mentioned you to him. I thought you guys should
yeah, I run my Zeno every Thursday at St. Francis of Assisi Church by Penn Station. So we have that every week.
And so I do think that kind of an issue, a broader issue that AI will bring about probably that we haven't spoken about, but I think is related to this, is that practice takes time, as I've discovered.
Yes.
And this is why I say it's a nascent practice that it has fits and starts. But even to take a longer, in-depth practice would take even more time, and finding half an hour a day is already challenging enough. And so I do think that people are worried a lot about AI putting people out of work. And I think, if society were able to respond in an intelligent way, which is a very large if, this could be a big opportunity that people could go back to kind of the business of being human and having these human real-life connections. If they weren't having to have 2 jobs or 1 job, 50 hours, 60 hours a week, et cetera, they could get back to things that are actually important. And so I think the real, to me, when I think of the future 20, 30 years of the challenge of AI, it's really about how to harness the wealth that it's going to create and the disruption in society of putting people out of work into reorganizing society so that people's worth is not just tied up in what's your job and, oh, you're not working this number of hours a week, there's something wrong with you. And I think religions can have a big part to play in that, because
it's not how you measure your worth.
It's not going to come from the rest of the capitalist consumerist societies that we find ourselves in. They're not going to come up with that, right? Unless we have the And if they do, it would be some sort of like
Yes.
gaming, you know, like live in a 3D game version of life for your whole life, and that's a risk. So I do think that
And that's an increasingly realistic possibility.
Yes.
Right?
It is. Yeah, I just did VR for the first time last week
How was it?
at the Rubin Museum, and it was great. It was a lot of fun, and I thought
Yeah.
I could spend a lot of time in that. I'm glad I don't have one at home.
Did you feel sort of nauseous when you came out? Or like,
I
how did you-
didn't. No. It was just a lot of. It was really magical.
Did you feel that real life was a little kind of not
No.
colourful enough?
No, because
Yeah.
I thought that the technology was not quite up
Oh,
to
okay.
snuff yet, and like
Right.
when I was walking in the environment, I thought, give it another 10 years, and this would be really convincing, and
Yeah.
and maybe this people would substitute real life for this, but I do think that maybe this chance of having time back, and leaving space to the traditional religions to then, you know, help people live lives,
No.
I think is really potentially the best thing that AI could do.
Not to put a downer on things, or maybe to do that very consciously. Haven't people
End on a downer.
on a down note. Haven't people various utopians through time, have they not been saying for a while that this next technological advancement that we're in the midst of now today is going to free up so much time? The washing machine's going to, you know, do this for you, the dishwasher, etc., and people increasingly have less and less time, despite all our technology, or maybe because of all our technological gadgetry and advancements. I don't know. I mean, Facebook is
Both,
specific.
I mean,
Yeah.
because you have to work at the pace of the available technology.
Yes, the speed of life.
But that's a question you'd have to think about, but it's a great question of what is it, because this is a long-standing prediction. Oh, these technologies are going to make everything easy for everyone, and it keeps not happening. Though you could argue that there's a sort of qualitative difference between all of the straightforwardly mechanical technologies we've developed to help us out and a manufactured intelligence. And so the question is there a reason to think that it would work this time? You know, that people would have an easier time with things, have more time on their hands. And then you said to go back to, I don't know, it's back to the things that matter, or, you know, forward more slowly.
But it's not going to happen on its own, as I was saying before. And there has to be something. One spiritual author says some crisis of great love or great suffering, you know, that just, you know, throws you for a loop. Otherwise, you'll be stuck. Oh, and I have more time. Ah! And then you go find something to occupy yourself with, because you're scared to death of going inside yourself. So you have to have some kind of external stimulus, as saying before, or internal impulse, something to make you really need to and want to go down into a deeper exploration of what life can be.
So this is the
and who you
problem.
really
I
are.
mean, this is something that I think a lot about, which is, to what extent are we really, we were talking about this just yesterday, to what extent are we really free agents who get to decide for themselves what we do on a day-to-day basis? And there's a lot of research showing that there's no free will. I mean, we are the products of technologies that very actively, specifically digital technologies, but not just specific, digital technologies, that very actively, consciously shape our consciousness.
Conditioning, yeah, psychological.
So
and
they turn us into consumers, they turn us into, you know, I mean, there's a recent report done by the UN where they're talking about Facebook's role in fomenting violence, being used as a tool in fomenting violence in Myanmar against the Rohingya Muslims, and Facebook has a really bad track record of this. And
you know, I was just going to say that, you know, going back to what you said, and Matthew also, that any product of human intelligence is intelligent. You know, a microwave is a very intelligent thing, and there's this kind of mutual interaction. You know, we created that affects us, and kind of going back and forth and things like that. But there's nevertheless a very significant kind of ontological gap, you know, you might say, between that, you know, which possesses agency and that which does not. So, in order to create an artificial intelligence, like, you know, in the way we understand it, like, you know, I guess what Michael's sense is, like, you know, that kind of, you know, something that is capable of agency, right? I think that is something, you know, that will indeed entail that we become kind of, you know, gods or God. And but I don't see it taking place now. I see it, like all these things, as useful tools, and they are extremely useful. There's, a certain kind of they're liable to mistakes. You can create this, integrated satellite system that will, control everything from your, dental implants to like whatever traffic jam, anything. So everything, and it can screw up. But it won't do it on the premises of self-determination, and that's why I was thinking that. Perhaps there's a certain trajectory, towards which it moves, and kind of there's a certain possibility, but I wouldn't classify anything of that is taking place now as artificial intelligence. And of course, this is a huge subject matter. Perhaps if you take a more nuanced approach and say, okay, but still, since it has a certain level of intelligence, not complete, kind of, some inferior intelligence, still intelligent, and it's capable of affecting us. I think on that level, it's a very, very fascinating conversation about how intelligence.
I've recently been noticing that, and I've read about this maybe in the Shallows book by, I remember the author's name, Nicholas Carr. That maybe in that book or elsewhere, I remember reading how people develop this relationship with artificial intelligence, Google being, of course, an example of artificial intelligence, although we tend not to see it as such because it's just standard now, it's not good enough or whatever. I expect it to predict what I'm typing, and then when it doesn't, I get a jolt of, oh, joy, my friend, he knows me. And when he doesn't, he, for some reason, is he here, I don't know why. It's not a she or an it, interestingly enough, right? And of course, there are all these. I came across. I forget the name of the. I think it may have been Cambridge University that actually has this page where you can go on and submit. It just takes data from 30 or so of your Facebook posts, and 30 or maybe 50. I doubt it's not. If it's even 50, as few as 30. If I'm correct in remembering this, and it can predict what kind of person you are more accurately than your partner, which is really interesting. So in other words, given the amount of data that's out there, they know me better than I know myself, apparently. And so where does that leave us as far as the question of human agency? Matthew, as the resident philosopher, if you'd like to speak to that a little bit.
I'm not sure I'd like to. Well, I think, agency is a favorite topic of mine, but I can go back to the bacteria and just add something that there's a lot of interesting research. There's a lot of interesting, not a lot, some interesting research being done, again, by people like Stuart Kaufman on prebiotic agency, because you were just talking about the question of whether and when these artificial systems might exhibit what we will be willing to call true agency, which is all wrapped up with that fuzzy notion of free will.
Yeah, very fuzzy.
So you've got this language of agency, whatever it is, it's an emergent property, and it's and now they're talking about prebiotic agency that there seems to be evidence of agential. I'm not even supposed to use these words, right? Agential or behavioral actions of non-living molecules, right? Simple, highly simple, but of course within a context, of a big history, the emergence of the universe from the planet and then life on the planet and so on. Agency has to crop up in some way. Unless you're going to go the route, which I do not, that it's just put in something. Once it's alive, it gets agency, or once it's a human, it gets spirit. It's got to be a part of this long evolutionary process, and so the idea that there's nothing in principle. What are they called? Substrate neutrality. There's nothing in principle to demand, to have the universe demand that the only real agency there can be is, a wet, fleshy, biological agency. Substrate neutrality just means other sorts of materials might be sufficient to make it possible. Not now, not in 20 years, not in 50 years, who knows how long, But in principle, there's nothing making it, that forecloses the possibility of, an intelligence that would impress you, that was manufactured,
We're also in that chain of being that I was mentioning before. Everything is analogous, so there's agency and consciousness even on some rudimentary level in stones.
Right, absolutely.
In this worldview.
Yes,
I think there's a truth
yeah.
to that we
Yeah.
haven't explored.
Well, thank you so much. I'm aware that the battery's almost dead. so I just...
Ours too.
There's the
I mean,
technology.
well, and
Telling
our
us
lack
what-
of agency vis-a-vis technology, the technology has to dictate. But I would, first of all, thank you. I'd like to thank you all very much for this, I think, very stimulating, fascinating, rich discussion. And I would also like to end on a downer note, but which is not good practice, only insofar as agency, I'm not convinced. I have to harp on about this a little bit. I've been doing that a little bit. But post-structuralists and others make a very convincing argument in saying that agency is really completely overrated.
Well, maybe 1% of what we do is actually free will.
Right,
Something like that.
Right. And as a
This is what I
religionist,
always say, even
Yeah.
if there's a smidgen of the stuff, it's worth worrying
Yeah.
about.
it's worth worrying about. And
Yeah.
where, as far as I'm concerned, as a religionist, my personal endeavor to the best that I can imagine it being is that I need to sort of marry it to a notion of the divine, and maybe I don't know why I keep waving at you because you're the resident AI expert. Not that you're the AI AI entity, but and artificial intelligence hopefully can.
Can I finish your sentences? That's the question. Go ahead. So I can't predict your question, so go ahead.
You will, once you have enough data. But no, and somehow the artificial intelligence and the technology, if it can, to echo what you were saying earlier, if it can help me to be a better person within my conception of that, then maybe that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, that's not a downer.
And that's not too much
It's
of a
like
downer.
lateral.
That's great.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks for having us.